Have you ever met someone who made you question your own sanity? Someone who smiles at you while twisting the knife in your back, so subtly that you don't even realize you re-bleeding until you re-empty. They're not monsters. They're not villains. They are the kind of people who can destroy your mind while making you believe they re-saving it. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But Jung also warned, not every transformation is beautiful. Some turn gold into dust. You see, Jung understood something terrifying about human nature. Evil doesn't always look evil. It often hides inside kindness, charm, and love. And when you let the wrong person close enough, they don't just hurt you, they rewrite you. There's a strange moment that happens in every toxic relationship. A quiet shift. At first, you feel seen, understood, maybe even healed. But slowly something changes. You start apologizing more, doubting yourself more. You start feeling smaller in your own skin, and you can't explain why. That's not coincidence. That's psychological erosion. And Jung said it happens when your unconscious begins to merge with someone else's shadow. He called this phenomenon psychic infection, meaning when you spend too long around a deeply unconscious person, you begin to absorb their energy, their darkness, as your own. They complain, you comfort. They insult, you justify. They destroy, and somehow, you're the one who feels guilty. That's not connection. That's control. According to Jung, every human being carries two sides: the persona, the mask you show the world, and the shadow, the part you hide, deny, or repress. Most people are unaware of their shadow. They pretend it doesn't exist. But when the shadow is ignored for too long, it starts leaking out. Through manipulation, jealousy, guilt, and deceit. Toxic people are those completely possessed by their shadow. They don't just project their pain, they weaponize it. They turn your empathy into chains, your kindness into weakness, your trust into a mirror that reflects only their wounds. And here's the dangerous truth Jung wanted us to understand. You don't attract toxic people by being broken. You attract them by being unconscious. When you don't see your own patterns, your own unhealed parts, your own fears of being alone, they do. And they use them. They become what Jung called the unconscious mirror. They reflect back your insecurities, your blind spots, your shadow, until you start to lose the boundary between you and them. That's how they destroy your mind. Not through violence, but through identification. But why do they seem so powerful? Why can a single toxic person pull an entire room into their energy, make everyone uncomfortable yet unable to look away? Jung's answer was chilling. Because they are ruled by the archetype of possession, a psychological force older than logic. Their energy isn't personal, it's primal. When you argue with them, you're not fighting a person, you're fighting an archetype. You can't win, because their goal isn't resolution. Their goal is chaos, Jung said it perfectly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Toxic people live entirely inside that darkness, ruled by desires, fears, and projections they'll never face. So instead, they make you face them for them. They pour their unresolved pain into you and walk away lighter, leaving you heavy with what was never yours. Think about it. You comfort the person who hurt you. You explain yourself to the one who never listens. You try to earn the love of someone who only gives it when it benefits them. That's not love. That's psychological warfare. Jung believed every toxic dynamic is a mirror test, a reflection of the parts of you that still need awakening. He didn't tell you to hate them. He told you to see them. Because the moment you see a manipulator, their power dies. The moment you name the pattern, the illusion breaks. So before we dive into the 5 types of mind destroyers Jung warned us about, remember this. The real danger isn't just being near toxic people. The real danger is becoming blind to their effect on your soul. Because the more you tolerate their chaos, the more you lose your center, until one day you can't tell whether you're living your life or surviving theirs. Carl Jung didn't want you to live afraid. He wanted you to live aware. And awareness starts with a simple question. Who around you feels like peace? And who feels like poison? If you can answer that honestly, you've already begun your awakening. So let us go deeper, into the minds of the 5 archetypal destroyers Jung revealed, the ones who hide in plain sight, wearing masks of love, pain, or perfection, but feeding off your soul every step of the way. They never raise their voice. They never seem angry. In fact, they might be the calmest person in the room, composed, charming, and impossibly persuasive. That's what makes them dangerous. Because the manipulator doesn't destroy you with force. They destroy you with logic. Carl Jung described them as the unconscious trickster, a person who hides their shadow behind intellect and control. They don't want to hurt you outright. They want to own how you think, feel, and see the world. Their greatest weapon? Confusion. They twist your words until you question your own memory. They invalidate your emotions so gently that you start policing your own feelings. They convince you that you're the problem, and you believe it because they sound so rational. That's not communication. That's psychological hypnosis. Jung believed manipulation begins when someone is terrified of losing control. The manipulator doesn't trust life, doesn't trust people, doesn't trust the unknown. So they construct an invisible web of control around everyone they love, disguised as care. They'll say things like, "I'm only telling you this for your own good," or, "You're too emotional. You need to calm down." Sounds reasonable, right? But the subtext is poison. What they really mean is, "Your truth threatens my power, so let me rewrite it for you." Over time, you start doubting yourself. You ask permission to feel. You edit your thoughts before you speak them. That's how the manipulator wins. Not by overpowering you, but by making you surrender willingly. Jung would say this person has become possessed by the persona archetype. They're obsessed with maintaining an image, the good partner, the wise friend, the helpful guide. But behind that mask lies insecurity so deep they can't bear to face it. Their mind whispers, "If I don't control everything, I'll fall apart." So they tighten their grip on you, on the relationship, on the narrative, and slowly, your reality stops being yours. Here's how Jung explained this dynamic. Every manipulator projects their inner chaos onto others. Instead of saying, "I'm afraid of being wrong," they make you feel guilty for disagreeing. Instead of saying, "I feel powerless," they micromanage your choices. They externalize what they can't integrate. And because you're empathetic, because you see their pain, you try to fix it. That's the trap. Jung once warned, the most dangerous thing is to be infected by someone else's unconscious. When you try to heal the manipulator, their shadow starts merging with yours. Suddenly, their guilt becomes your guilt. Their fear becomes your anxiety. Their self-hatred becomes your constant self-doubt. You wake up one day feeling like a stranger in your own life, exhausted, empty, and confused. You don't even remember who you were before them, and that's when the manipulation is complete. Because the manipulator doesn't just want attention, they want ownership. Ownership of your emotions, ownership of your decisions, ownership of how you see yourself. They drain you until you're a reflection of their control, calm on the outside, but dying quietly on the inside. But here's the part Jung wanted you to understand. You're not a victim, you're a mirror. If you attract a manipulator, it asks because there's a part of you, buried deep, that is afraid to own your voice, afraid to set boundaries, afraid to disappoint people. They find that weakness and live inside it. The cure isn't fighting them, it's seeing them. Because once you see the pattern, it loses its magic. When you say, "No," for the first time, and mean it, their mask cracks. Their power starts slipping. And underneath the charming words, you finally see the truth. They're not confident. They're terrified. They've built their identity on control because they have no real center. Jung said, "Until you accept your shadow, you will project it onto others." That's the secret of every manipulator. They are ruled by the very darkness they deny. They control you because they can't control themselves. So if you want freedom, you don't have to expose them. You have to expose the part of you that still fears being misunderstood, because when you stop needing their approval, they lose their throne. And here's the paradox Jung would smile at. The manipulator's lesson isn't to destroy your mind. It's to wake it up. They show you exactly where your boundaries end. They force you to confront the voice in your head that says, "If I say no, they'll leave." Good. Let them. Because only when you stop letting others define your worth will you finally reclaim your mind. Carl Jung didn't study the human soul to make you fear people. He studied it so you could recognize patterns and rise above them. The manipulator may win small battles, but they always lose the war. Because truth doesn't bend forever. And when you see through their illusion, you don't just escape them, you evolve beyond them. If this part made you see someone's face in your mind, stay tuned. Because the next type of mind destroyer Jung warned about is far darker. The kind who doesn't control you through reason, but through emotion. You've met them before. You just didn't have the words for what they were. The person who walks into a room and suddenly the air feels heavier. They talk about their problems, their pain, their drama. And by the time they leave, it feels like your soul has aged 10 years. That's an emotional vampire. They don't suck blood, they suck energy. Carl Jung would call them psychic parasites, people who unconsciously feed on the vitality of others to escape their own emptiness. They don't even realize they're doing it. But by the time they're done, you're left drained, confused, and guilty for feeling that way. The emotional vampire doesn't always appear sad or weak. Sometimes they're charismatic. They smile, they listen, they connect deeply, until you realize everything they do comes with an invisible hook. They tell you their pain in vivid detail, not to heal, but to bind you. They want your empathy, your attention, your emotional labor. Because deep down, they're terrified of being alone with their own darkness. Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." The emotional vampire is living proof. Instead of confronting their inner void, they build a network of people to carry it for them. They disguise dependency as vulnerability. They mistake pity for love, and they call it connection, when in truth, it's consumption. Here's the tricky part. They don't look evil. In fact, they might appear like the most empathetic person you know. But Jung warned that empathy without boundaries is self-destruction. The emotional vampire thrives on that weakness. They will confide in you constantly, trauma dump without pause, and then say, "You're the only one who understands me." At first, it feels special. You feel chosen, needed, important. But slowly, your energy begins to dim, because every time you listen, you give a piece of yourself away. Jung believed this type of person is possessed by the wounded child archetype. Something in them never healed, maybe a rejection, abandonment, or deep loneliness, and instead of nurturing that pain, they feed it with attention. Their unconscious motto is simple. If I can't feel whole, I'll make sure no one else around me does either. And so, they drain. Not because they're cruel, but because they're empty. You start noticing the pattern. They call you only when they're in crisis. They need constant reassurance. They turn every conversation back to their suffering. And when you finally set a boundary, they make you feel guilty for it. They'll say things like, "I guess you don't care anymore," or "You've changed." What they really mean is, "You've stopped being my emotional supply." And that's the moment most people break. Because you start thinking, maybe I'm selfish, maybe I should be there for them more. No, Jung would tell you, this is emotional enmeshment. You've become their battery. They are feeding on your compassion to avoid their own confrontation with the self. The real danger isn't that they drain your energy once. It's that they make it your identity. You start believing your worth lies in fixing people, that you're the strong one, that you can handle it all. But deep down, you're collapsing. You feel tired, but can't rest. You feel guilty for saying no. You feel invisible, because all your light has been redirected towards someone else's darkness. That's not love. That's bondage. So how do you break free? Not by cutting them off with anger, but by understanding their pattern. Jung taught that every person you attract is a mirror of your unconscious. So ask yourself, why do I keep giving my energy away? Why do I feel responsible for other people's emotions? You'll find the truth is buried in your own shadow, perhaps a part of you that fears abandonment or feels unworthy unless you're useful. When you heal that part, the vampire loses its grip, because they can only feed on unhealed wounds. Here's the paradox. Once you stop rescuing them, they will accuse you of being cold. They might even call you selfish. But that's just projection. Their pain trying to stay alive. Don't defend yourself. Don't explain yourself. Just hold your energy. Because the moment you stop bleeding for others, you begin to live for yourself. Carl Jung said something profound. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. That's the purpose of encountering an emotional vampire. Transformation. They come into your life not to destroy you, but to teach you boundaries. To force you to realize that real compassion is not endless giving, it's balanced energy exchange. When you learn that, you evolve. You stop mistaking sympathy for love. You stop confusing attention for intimacy. You stop trying to save others at the cost of yourself. And in doing so, you reclaim your light. Because the truth is, you were never their victim. You were their mirror, showing them the wholeness they refuse to see. So, if someone's been draining you lately, remember this. You don't need to cut them out in hate. You just need to stop bleeding for them. Once you do, they'll either rise to meet your energy or fade into their own shadow, and that's when your power returns. You've seen them before, maybe in your workplace, your family, or even in your reflection. The person who appears confident, successful, charming, almost untouchable. They command attention. Their words feel sharp, precise, hypnotic. But behind that dazzling mask lies a void so deep, it terrifies them. Carl Jung called this archetype the persona gone mad. The narcissist isn't truly confident. They're addicted to being seen as confident. They don't seek love. They seek mirrors. And they'll do anything to protect the illusion of perfection. Jung believed that every human wears a mask, a persona, to function in society. It's how we navigate the world, how we fit in. But when the mask becomes the only thing you know, when your entire identity depends on others' validation, you lose your soul. And that's the narcissist's curse. They've built their entire sense of self on a fragile foundation, how others perceive them. And because of that, they must constantly manipulate the stage, control the narrative, dominate every emotional space, not because they're powerful, but because they're terrified of disappearing if they don't. At first, their energy feels magnetic. They make you feel seen, admired, even special. They mirror your words, your values, your emotions, as if you've found your other half. But soon, the mask begins to slip. Their compliments turn into criticisms. Their warmth turns cold when you stop feeding their ego. You start walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing, because every word feels like a potential explosion. This is the dance of the narcissist. They seduce, they trap, and then they drain. Not for your energy, but for your reflection. They need your admiration to feel alive, your approval to feel real. Without it, they collapse into the abyss of their own unacknowledged self-hatred. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." So what is the narcissist here to teach you? To see the danger of your own masks, to remind you that if you build your identity only on how others see you, you will eventually forget who you are. The narcissist is a warning from the psyche. Do not abandon your authenticity for attention. Behind the narcissist's arrogance lies the most fragile ego imaginable. They can't handle criticism. They crumble when ignored. Because deep down, they don't believe in their own worth. They believe only in the performance of worthiness. This is why Jung said, "The greater the outward show, the darker the inner reality." And that's exactly what makes the narcissist so dangerous. Not because they're evil, but because they're empty. And emptiness, when disguised as superiority, becomes destructive. So how do you recognize them? And more importantly, how do you protect yourself? You'll notice one thing. They always need an audience. Whether through success, drama, or victimhood, they crave emotional reaction. If you stay calm, they panic, because control slips through their fingers when they can't provoke you. Your silence, your indifference, your refusal to play the game, that's what weakens them. Because you're no longer giving them what they need most, validation. But Jung's insight was deeper than simple defense. He believed the narcissist represents the shadow of our culture. We live in an age obsessed with image, where people mistake visibility for value, where the number of followers defines self-worth, where persona replaces soul. And in that collective mirror, the narcissist isn't an exception, they're a reflection. They show us what happens when the mask becomes our master, when we confuse performance with identity, when the need to appear strong becomes stronger than the need to be strong. Jung's cure wasn't to destroy the narcissist, but to understand them, because understanding disarms illusion. He said the path to wholeness requires confronting the shadow, and in the narcissist, the shadow is exaggerated to teach us one thing. Power without humility becomes poison. The narcissist's tragedy is not that they manipulate others. It is that they manipulated themselves first. They've cut themselves off from their true nature. They've built a castle of glass and convinced themselves it's stone. But the moment reality hits, rejection, failure, age, that glass begins to shatter. And when it does, the narcissist faces their greatest fear, being ordinary. That's why Jung's wisdom matters more today than ever, because in a world full of masks, the rarest thing is truth. And truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only thing that can heal the wound of narcissism. So, if you've ever been caught in the orbit of a narcissist, don't seek revenge, seek awareness, because once you understand what drives them, you stop playing their game. You realize their cruelty is just camouflage for pain, and that realization sets you free. You stop trying to change them. You stop begging for empathy from the emotionally bankrupt. You stop giving your energy to black holes disguised as people. You rise, not in arrogance, but in clarity. And that clarity is power. So the next time someone tries to lure you into their illusion, remember, the most terrifying thing to a narcissist is someone who no longer needs their approval. That's when you reclaim your soul. Because in the end, Carl Jung didn't teach us to hate the darkness. He taught us to understand it. And once you understand it, it loses its power. So keep your light. Guard your peace. And never forget, the moment you see through the mask, you stop being their reflection and start becoming your own truth. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because together, we'll keep exploring the psychology that frees the soul from illusion.